the scene. He's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. One of my favorite films from last year, actually it came out in 2022, was a movie called Return to Seoul. It's a French film starring Yi-min Park, made by Davy Chow. It's about a woman returning, a French woman, a Korean adopted woman, or a woman adopted in France, born in Korea, returning to Seoul. Hollywood Reporter described it as a visceral search for identity, and it had that quality. The central female character in the movie seemed perpetually in search of who she was. We have a book in a way that perhaps might mirror some of this, except rather than fictional, it's based on truth. It's a memoir by my guest today, Tracy O'Neill, Woman of Interest. Tracy is joining us from Brooklyn in New York. Tracy, did you see the movie Return to Seoul?
I did, yeah.
What did you think of it?
I quite liked it. The song in it, that pedal song, is really beautiful. And she's listening to it in the opening scene when she has the headphones on. But yeah, I liked it a lot.
Did it resonate with your narrative? It's a fictional book, but it's a book about a woman who seemed perpetually confused about her return to Seoul. And of course, your book is not really about a return to Seoul, but nonetheless, there are some eerie comparisons, aren't there?
I didn't particularly feel that way, actually, but...
So tell me about the book, Woman of Interest. It's a memoir. Is it entirely truthful?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't make anything up. But certainly there are parts, you can never contain your entire life in a book. So a lot of the work that makes it creative has to do with the shaping of the narrative and what is chosen as part of the narrative and what's sort of elided. Yeah.
So what's the story? It's a story of your life, is that correct?
Well, it's sort of mostly covers a period between 2020 and 2023. And the bulk of that is really 2020 to 2021. And so it follows an investigation of sorts, namely into a woman who I had not met since birth, who happened to be my mother. So it sort of details the early part of the search when I was mostly in Poughkeepsie in a one-bedroom apartment, and then, my return to Brooklyn, and then eventually going to Korea.
So borrowing that Hollywood Reporter description of Return to Seoul as a visceral search for identity, is this a book about your own visceral search for identity?
I'm not sure if I would say that it's... I wouldn't foreground identity as the primary site of inquiry in the book. For me, I think the book is tuned a little bit more toward thinking about or questioning where and how and when home is. And it also, I think, is a book that's interested to some extent in the question of the good life and what that has to do with the stories that we tell.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. This is a memoir. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in New England, and so mostly on the South Shore of Massachusetts, and then in southern New Hampshire. And yeah.
And you were obviously adopted from Korea. Is that fair? Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
And so you have no memories of Korea itself.
No. So, I mean, I came to the United States when I was, um, really only, I guess, 5 months old. So I don't remember Korea. And part of what's sort of brought, I think, to the fore in the narrative is the question of what the stakes are in the search, in a sense. So, what are the stakes of a loss that you don't necessarily, that you can't exactly name or articulate?
Your name, of course, Tracy O'Neill. When someone might hear that name, they would think, well, and they heard that you were from southern Massachusetts, they would assume perhaps you were of Irish descent. When you were growing up, were you always aware of being originally from Korea?
Yes. I mean, I think that's a pretty inescapable fact. Maybe not specifically from Korea, but it was very clear that, obviously, I mean, that I was Asian, let's say.
And were your parents? Tell me a little bit about your parents, your Massachusetts parents.
Yeah, I mean, they are from, basically working class Massachusetts, greater Boston area. And so they adopted me when they were around 37. And yeah.
What was their attitude to you in terms of identity? Or did they have an attitude? The whole notion of identity and where you were from and being an American, was this something that they tried to develop? I mean, many adopted parents, I think, struggle with this in terms of whether or not the child should be defined or think of themselves as Korean or Chinese or African or European versus American, if that's where they were originally from.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I knew that I was born in Korea, but my identity was staked out as very American. There's like pictures of me in like a red, white, and blue outfit, when I got my citizenship, when I was a kid. So yeah, I mean, I didn't grow up speaking Korean. I, didn't really know much about Korea at all. So I was very much sort of the place where I was raised.
Did you have other Korean friends when you were growing up in Massachusetts?
No, I didn't actually know any other Korean or any other people that were born in Korea other than my brother. So.
And then when you were growing up, was in a sense there this longing, this sense of wanting to know more about your mother, for example?
I would say that I didn't necessarily feel that way. I think, or at least I couldn't feel that I felt that way, if that makes sense. So I'm sure that there must have been something there. And of course, there is a knowledge of absence that I think was extremely present. But it really wasn't until later that I felt like I needed to find that person. And I wasn't, I think that in some ways I was not exactly sure why it became so important at various moments. but I was very aware that there was something that I didn't want to happen, which was the sort of that that meeting being foreclosed, which in the book I sort of, talk about through this particular image that became a sort of recurring image in my mind. And that was, early in the pandemic, very early in the pandemic. There was an article that I had read that talked about this older man dying alone. And I think the phrase that was used was that there was no one to contact about the matter of his ashes, and that he barely took up any space in the world. And so that was sort of harrowing to me. And this became something that I didn't want to happen, which I suppose is a little bit different than knowing what you do want to happen.
You used the phrase earlier, knowledge of absence. What does that, not only what does it mean, but what does it feel like?
To me, or you mean in general, or?
To you?
Well, I mean, I guess it. So what does it feel like? I'm not sure I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, what does it, perhaps let me rephrase the question. You used the phrase, what does it mean, knowledge of absence? Is it sort of knowledge of a hole in yourself, a vacuum, or a mystery?
Oh, well, I wouldn't say a hole in myself, certainly. But there is a knowledge, when I say knowledge of absence, I was referring to, there is a knowledge of the absence of this woman who was my biological mother, who is my biological mother. And so, this might not be apparent, right, to other people. So, for instance, somebody might not have a knowledge of absence if, say, they were unaware of, like, if they somehow didn't know that that person was missing. So, for instance, I have a friend who didn't realize that his father wasn't his father, his biological father, until he was an adult. So he did not grow up with a knowledge of the absence of that person.
It's interesting. This long. I'm not sure whether everyone longs for identity, but it's a theme. It seems in many ways in a lot of contemporary literature. We did a show last week with another O'Neill, Joseph O'Neill, who has a book out called Godwin, which is also a novel about longing and identity. This one in Africa rather than in East Asia. You wrote an interesting review of 3 novels in the New York Times last year, which was entitled, I don't know if you put this title together, novels about women longing in obsessive, sometimes uncanny ways. Do women, do you think, long differently than men, or can men also long in obsessive, uncanny ways?
Well, men definitely can, but I didn't. I didn't choose that title, or frankly, even the books that I reviewed.
But when it comes to longing, I want to get to the book in the second half of the show, but was there always this longing in you to know more about your mother, or, as you say, was it something that came to you later?
No, it was something that came to me later. I think I was almost preternaturally disinterested for a long time. So, yeah.
What does that mean, preternaturally disinterested?
Well, maybe a more precise way of phrasing it would be that would be unexpectedly disinterested. I couldn't sort of name what the significance would be of meeting this person for most of my life.
So in other words, you just didn't really care for most of your life.
Yeah, I didn't know like what it would do per se. Yeah.
We are speaking with Tracy O'Neill, the author of a new book, a new memoir. It's not a woman, it's Woman of Interest, the memoir. That's her third book. We're going to take a short break, and then I want to come back with Tracy and talk more specifically about the book itself. But I want to thank our friends at the Disorder podcast, a wonderful new podcast about the disordered, the politically and economically disordered nature of the world. They help us support to get great guests like Tracy O'Neill. I'm going to run a short feature on the Disorder podcast, and then we'll be back with Tracy O'Neill to talk specifically about her new memoir, Woman of Interest. So don't go away, anyone. We'll be back in a second.
Not working together anymore?
The United States, some European societies, are so divided.
And that we lurch from one crisis to the next without any coherent vision from our leaders.
There is this big space of disorder, and we're just kind of holding up our hands and going, well, don't know what we could do.
If so, Disorder, co-produced by Gullhanger, is the podcast for you. Every Tuesday, we bring together some of the world's leading thinkers to unpack our new era of global enduring disorder. And we move beyond the headlines to actually propose solutions out of this mess in our Ordering the Disorder segment.
How do you repair disorder? It's by becoming a community.
Search Disorder in your podcast app to listen right now.
Strongly encourage the Disorder podcast. You can check it out. We are speaking today with Tracy O'Neill, the author of Woman of Interest, a memoir. Tracy, in the first half of the show, we talked a little bit about your background and about your, perhaps in terms of your earlier in your life, your disinterest or ambivalence about knowing where you were from. You mentioned that all this changed during COVID. Was there a particular moment which sparks the beginning of Woman of Interest?
I think that actually what I spoke about before, that sort of image that arrived to me reading this news article about this older man dying alone during COVID, was really galvanizing for me. Certainly, I think in the couple of years preceding that moment, I had thought about it more. And part of what I was thinking about was actually just how strange it was that I had not had more interest. And I sort of, I think I was questioning myself a little bit about whether in fact I was deceiving myself, so on and so forth. And so yeah.
So to cut a long story short, and I'm borrowing from your X page, I'm quoting you. The book is about the time I tried to get a private eye to find my mother in Korea. How did that happen? Is that something that a decision that you made quickly, or were you wrestling with it, the idea of hiring a private eye to find your mother?
Well, I had made a couple of inquiries previous to that. So kind of going more normal routes, like I had tried to go through the NCRC, which is the agency in South Korea that will in fact try to locate the biological parents of adopted people. But as it's mentioned in the book, thousands of people do this. And beyond that, it was COVID. So, or it was at sort of the beginning of the COVID pandemic. So at that point, many organizations and agencies were not running as usual. Many people were staying home, so on and so forth. And the adoption agency that I had been adopted from had closed down years before. So I started inquiring with private investigators, sort of thinking that they might be able to find this person.
And I know also that in college you discovered a green folder containing your Korean passport and adoption documents.
Yes.
What was that experience like?
I think it was just sort of surprising because I didn't really think that there were any details, any further details than I thought I had, right? Which was like my mother's height, and my biological mother's height, and my place of birth, and so. It was quite surprising because it's like almost something that stretches the imagination that some of the details that were in this document, would be there.
Did you stumble on these documents? Did your adopted parents show them to you?
No. It was an accident that I found them. I think I was trying to find my birth certificate. I now actually can't remember if this was when I was going to begin college and I needed that for paperwork, or if it was when I was going to study abroad. It was one or the other. And I actually don't really remember now.
So you went out to hire a private investigator. Tell me about this person.
Yeah, I mean, like, Joe is his name, incredibly voluble and fun to talk to, and somebody who has like lived a million lives. Like I actually never met this person in person. We spent all this time talking on the phone, but he became somebody that was this huge figure in a way in my life in that period.
And did you explain to Joe that all this was triggered by your own kind of fear of loneliness, or you didn't ask?
I don't think that he asked. But I also wouldn't characterize it as this being triggered by my own fear of loneliness.
Is the book, Tracy, is it a narrative of discovery? Do you want people to be reading this and thinking, oh my God, is she going to find her mother? Or is this really, is that not the central issue in the book?
I mean, I don't think that having an interest in whether the narrator finds her mother is mutually exclusive with other considerations. So certainly, I think that's something that's important, right, for people to be, invested in some of the outcome in the narrative. But I am also somebody who's very interested in language and style and thinking about different forms. I think that the book is, also very interested in thinking about the way in which the stories that we receive open up and foreclose opportunities to connect with each other. It's interested in questions about what it means for somebody to live a good life. And I think it's also interested in the sort of thrill and cruelty of optimism.
You're relatively young to be writing a memoir, although a memoir is an increasingly popular form. It's your third book. Were you ever ambivalent about that, thinking maybe I need to experience more, become older to write your memoir? Or Do you think that's the wrong way of thinking about memoirs?
Well, I mean, to me, what differentiates memoir from autobiography is that memoir tends to be situated in a more discrete temporal plane. So it wasn't really a concern for me. I think you look at writers who have written multiple memoirs in their lives, depending on what they wanted to focus on. So you think about somebody like Annie Ernaux or Joan Didion, and both of these people, wrote more than one. So I think that, I wasn't concerned that, say, I wasn't going to catch my whole life in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you mentioned Didion. Sometimes when you read her, it seems as if even all her books are about herself, for better or worse. I mean, she's obviously a wonderful writer. There are some people who believe that all writing is formally or informally autobiographical. Do you think there's some truth to that? Or can one escape oneself with one's writing?
No, you can never escape yourself. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily autobiographical. But anybody who writes is writing from a particular point of view, and so things like the details that you notice, the rhythms that you write in, your interest in plot, your interest in genre, all of those are sort of are personal.
You think in a funny kind of way, Tracy, as a writer, that this book and the hiring of the private detective, it was a search for yourself as a writer. As you say, all writing is autobiographical, but if you were defined as a young woman by what you called your knowledge of absence, you didn't quite know who you are. So perhaps this book is a narrative about a female writer discovering herself.
Well, I mean, the book is interested in the notion of the missing person that we have not yet become. But I think that that's a little bit different than what I was talking about before with the knowledge of absence. When I spoke about the knowledge of absence, I was speaking about the knowledge of the absence of this this person who is my mother from my life. But I don't necessarily. I think there's a connection to identity, but it doesn't really indicate a sort of void of identity. It just is the absence of that person from being more formative to it. And so the absence, right, really becomes what's formative in a sense, or could be considered formative. But it's not a sort of like hole in the self. I don't want to imply that. But I think in terms of the question about writing, I mean, certainly, I think every book for me has been a chance to think through again what type of book I could write. Every book I'm sort of teaching myself how to write it as I go. And so certainly, there were differences in this book just because it was nonfiction. So I did need to sort of learn how to tell this particular story. But I would say that as a writer, there are sort of fundamental interests that I return to over and over again. But there might be very different narratives, or the style might be a little bit different, the scale might be different. So, for instance, it's like all of my books are interested in obsession. All of my books have a missing person, but they're also very. I think that they end up being very different narratives.
Another Korean film, I'm sure you've seen this, that I enjoyed last year was Past Lives, which is really, I think, a movie about how lives are never quite past. In terms of the narrative of Woman of Interest, are you a different person now, having gone through this experience?
Yeah, I mean, I am, and I think we're always changing. But I think how I'm different is probably is maybe more pronounced in this case. But I am somebody who's really interested in thinking about time and the way that we relate to time emotionally. So if we think about something that is, let's say, a crisis, we often think of that as an event that erupts and is more discrete and requires a different type of attention. And I think that this is a book that is interested in thinking about what it would mean for somebody to sort of protract that sense of crisis over a more durable time, and also to have a sort of different attendant reaction to it as a result.
Do you still fear loneliness? It seems as if this whole search for your birth mother was triggered by a fear of loneliness, or certainly the fear of a lonely death. Is that something that this experience changed, or is this still a primordial fear in you?
No. In fact, I originally wrote an essay that sort of is similar to the first chapter of the book, in which I more explicitly said that I don't actually have the fear of dying alone. And that was something I ended up cutting in the revision of this book because, the beginning was just too slow. But I wouldn't necessarily say that a fear of loneliness was the motivating factor for this search.
We don't want to give away everything, Tracy. We want people to read the book, and there's certainly some suspense in the narrative. But you mentioned earlier that one of the things that triggered this, along with the experience or the feeling, the fear of a lonely death, was a search for the good life. What did you learn both from the process of hiring the private detective and searching for your birth mother and the writing of your book about the good life? What is the good life, or what could it be? What did you learn from this book?
Well, I think that what ends up sort of happening in the book is that I am looking more closely at what choices my biological mother made, and what felt available to her as the good life. And so, I think that for her, she's somebody who felt like the good life was very tied up in a few things, like a few received narratives. But she also, in many ways, was an outlaw. So, wealth was very important to her. And she spent a great deal of her life chasing wealth. I think that in some ways, as a woman in Korea at that time, that was unusual. But then there are also things that are maybe more expected, like that she feels very strongly about marriage, although she has been married multiple times. And yeah. So in some ways, I think the book is sort of trying to see what this other person sees as the good life and taking it as a sort of prism through which the reflection about this person at this particular moment in her life, me, could think about like what might matter to me, and what might make up that good life, or where the sort of places and moments of home sort of came to the surface. And so, so that was sort of what it was for, my mother. I think the book is also really interested in friendship, and in many ways, I think when I look at the book, if I try to see it from the outside, I do see some of the heroes of this narrative really being the friends in the book. So Ali, Maggie, Justin, Tresca. I think these people end up being, sort of nodes or figures that animate that good life, or the sense of what
And might we see a movie? We began with a reference to Return to Seoul. Would you like to make this? Would you like to have someone make this into a movie?
I think that I would be interested in it. I would definitely want to be involved in writing it, though.
Well, there we have it. Tracy O'Neill, the author of Woman of Interest, a memoir. Anyone who wants to turn her wonderful new book into a screenplay should contact her. Tracy, best of luck with the new book. And thank you so much for appearing on Keen On. A real pleasure and honor. Thank you so much.
Can I step on the sea?